Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you inky savages are joining us for episode number 154 of the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast. We're really excited to be here today, as we always are, but today is a very special episode. This week we have a gentleman who participates in all kinds of ADHD awareness charities and events, and we have him here to talk about his experience with ADHD and how we can bring ADHD awareness to people. Now, ADHD is a common thing that happens with a lot of kids. I grew up with it. I know that it affected my life in many ways, and it affects a lot of people. And I think it's one of these things that a lot of people don't talk about, or people are just not aware about it. So I'm really excited to have him here. But before we get to that, we have to talk about our sponsors, the people who are paying the bills to keep the lights on here at the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast. So before any further ado, Gold Spot Pens. Please check out Gold Spot Pens using the affiliate link in the description below. And make sure to use coupon code. Tom, what's the coupon code? I already forgot from last week.
It's my last name, Otto, O-D-D-O.
Okay, coupon code Otto at checkout for an additional savings on all products on the Gold Spot Pens affiliate link website or Gold Spot Pens website. There are some exclusions that do apply, so be aware of that. There are some snobby brands out there, right? Esterbrook not being one of them anymore. So let's give Esterbrook a round of applause for not being snotty and snooty and allowing discounts on their products. So please check out the affiliate link in the description below using coupon code Otto. Also, Luxury Brands of America is excited to bring you, and I'm going to reread the read from last week's read right now. Luxury Brands of America is excited to bring you the Endless fountain pen. So Endless is known around the world for its ink-loving notebooks, and it's just more than a stationery company because it has achieved something very few companies have been able to do, other than Platinum and Pilot. But we're not supposed to talk about other brands because we're talking about Endless, a sleek and elegant-looking retractable fountain pen, and not to mention at an incredible price. Endless is proud to bring you the very arrogant named the Creator fountain pen. The Creator is made of high-grade ABS plastic. That's Lego plastic for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about. This pen will be able to handle all of your life's adventures, available only in fine nibs for now. More nib sizes will be released in the future. This is sure to be one of the biggest launches of any pen in 2023. That is a bold statement. I'm going to read it again. This is sure to be one of the biggest launches of any pen in 2023, so be sure not to miss out and pre-order yours now with retailers that take pre-orders. And if your favorite retailer is Gold Spot, they don't take pre-orders because they don't like doing that kind of thing. But listen, it's a $50 MSRP for a retractable fountain pen called the Creator. I'm not, again, I think that's an arrogant name for a pen. Are you saying the pen is the creator? Or you're the creator, or the pen is empowering people to be creative?
The pen gives you the power of creation.
All right. Great. So anyway, it's called the Creator. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on one at $50. I think it's a steal. When they are launched and available mid-March, I believe it was, please check them out at goldspot.com. Now, last but not least, please check out brlcoffeeco.com at brlcoffeeco.com. And check out my friend Neil's swag when it comes to coffee, when it comes to the best caffeine and coffee bean on the planet. It's the best coffee ever created in the history of anything ever created, ever. And it has different cooks, different darknesses, different caffeine contents. And the best thing about the BRL coffee is it doesn't give you the crackhead jitters, which, if that's not a selling point, I don't know what is.
Hey, well, Roy.
Yeah.
I'm drinking Lovesick.
Oh, you finally got your coffee.
I got my coffee, so I'm drinking Lovesick. I did it
in
the French press. I like it. I like it a lot. It's very good.
It's much better than that Rook bullshit that you were giving me, right?
Oh, hold on now. Hold on. You can't go throwing under the bus.
I got to finish the sponsorships, all right? You can't interrupt me. So anyway, we're really excited for episode number 154, and we're really excited to talk to my good friend Erik over here, who is a bicycle instructor and bike riding aficionado. And he was actually my bike instructor. That's how we met. But before we get started with this week's episode of the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast, I just got to give you guys the quick disclaimer. This podcast is not scripted and therefore will contain potty mouth words, both from Tom and I. So be forewarned. You have been warned. Now, on to the podcast.
The PenBoyRoy Entertainment Podcast. Stay savage.
Today we have on a very special guest. His name is Erik. And Erik, as I said, he is a bicycle riding aficionado and instructor when it comes to riding bikes, building bikes, repairing bikes, and whatnot. He's also a social media influencer. We'll talk about that later. But before we get started, I just want to say, Erik, we are very excited to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Can you do me a favor, do Tom, myself, and all our dozens and dozens of listeners a favor? Can you talk to us a little bit about why you're here today?
Yeah. Well, I'm here to talk my relationship with my son and our discovery when he was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. It's something that really influenced our entire family. It's influenced me tremendously in kind of the direction I've gone with my bike riding. I've incorporated my bike riding a lot into it, and I've dedicated about 6 months every year for a single charity that's very close to my heart. And through our experiences, besides the charity, we try to help other young parents, other maybe not young parents, parents who are discovering it late in life or late into their relationship with their children, that they're also diagnosed with either ADHD or anxiety or some kind of mental health issue, and help them deal with that, help them try to point them in the right direction so that they don't go through what we had to go through. Because it is, adolescence mental health it's a tough thing. We always talk about the mental health crisis in America and that, and it's always geared towards the adults that we see out there. We don't really think about what's happening to the kids and how difficult it is, and try to recognize it early on. Besides recognizing it and getting them the help they need, it's ending that stigma around it. I'll be the first one to tell you, as a new parent, we looked at all that stuff when you talked about ADHD and all these kids on medications and stuff like that. We were like, it's just being a good parent. It's the way they're parented. I'm not gonna blow smoke at you guys saying we weren't like that with our first child, and it was our first child that has ADHD and the anxiety, and it was a hard lesson to learn. So hopefully through the charity, through coming on your podcast, anybody who's experienced this situation can kind of recognize it a little bit faster, maybe kind of know what to look for after hearing some of the stuff that we went through, my wife and myself and my son. Hopefully they can recognize that and kind of have a smoother process through the whole thing.
So you're talking about this charity. Now, you brought up some things that I actually want to touch on, which is really interesting. You talked about your experience. And before we get into that, what does this charity do? First of all, what's the charity called?
Okay, so the charity is the Ride for Mental Health. Okay. And it's they hold it in New Paltz, New York every year. So I've done charities in the past. This happened with my son and my family. I did a quick search. I think I rode first its second year. It's in its fifth year now. We're going into its sixth year. And it's growing exponentially. The numbers have gone from about 100 people to, I think there were 300 or 400 people there last year riding. All different courses, 100 miles to 50 miles, 1 day, 2 days. And it's become quite an event. It's a really nice charity, and 100% of proceeds go to the McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate. And that's what I look for when I do a charity. I don't like charities with a lot of overhead. I want the money raised. I want to be able to tell people when I raise money, it's going to something. It's not going to a party or a CEO somewhere. It's going to go to help that cause. And one of the nope,
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going. You were saying in one of the.
Besides the research aspect behind it, what I'm really passionate about is ending the stigma. Me and my wife always use when we talk to friends and family and stuff, if our child was in a wheelchair, people would look at us with sympathy. But because he looks like a normal child, and he is a normal child, but they don't see something that he's struggling with, they act differently. And it can be heartbreaking because you go to a soccer game and they don't like the way your child's acting, and then we have to be talked to, and they want the refs to tell us that if he can't control himself, they want him off the league, stuff like that. And that is heartbreaking when you're a parent. So if we can get that education out there, have people recognize this, that these are things that people struggle with, and to have that kind of sympathy, it would go a long way.
And what is the function of this charity? So I like how you actually took a passion for writing and a passion for this awareness and somehow found a charity that combines it. But the proceeds go to this Harvard affiliate organization. But what do they do for people with ADHD? How do they raise awareness? How do they raise awareness?
Okay, it's the hospital. It's a broad gamut of disorders. So they go from addiction to eating disorder, anxiety. They've had guest speakers talking about stuff that I just ride bikes, so I was trying to put my head around what they're doing. But they're really trying to push also the recognition in the upcoming future of doctors, so that they're recognizing it, or they're also aiding in ending that stigma around the mental health aspect of things.
So it's helping professionals get their voice out there in terms of ending the stigma and educating the public with regard to the ADHD, the symptoms and behaviors that are found in adolescents and children and even adults. Is that fair to say? Okay. That sounds good. Now, I think that I love the fact that 100% of the proceeds go to the cause. And that to me is also very important because it's not lining somebody's pockets. It's actually going to kids. It's actually going to the outcome of benefiting people with ADHD or people dealing with children with ADHD. I myself have grown up with the difficulties of being a kid diagnosed with ADHD and not being really treated. It was always spoken about like a bruise, like just ignore it and it'll go away, or he'll grow out of it, or stuff. And what was frustrating for me and my personal experience was growing out of something that you're struggling with is never easy, especially when no one else knows that you have it and they can't offer you any guidance. Everything is you're just not trying hard enough. You're just being lazy. And that in a nutshell is just a quick summary. I've talked about it on the podcast before of my experience. But what I'm interested to hear about, Erik, is what was your experience? How old was your son when you first discovered this? What prompted you to look into it in the first place? What kind of things were you seeing? And how did you find out that your son had ADHD, and how did you cope with it?
Okay, so not gonna lie, preschool, the preschool teachers would say, we think he has ADHD, he needs to be checked out, stuff like that. And we took that, so how old is he, 4 or 5 years old? We took that as he's a 4 or 5 year old. Like, let him be a 5-year-old.
Right.
And we even moved schools because it's all we heard from them. We didn't quite accept that because, again, new parents, this is our first child. You think it's typical 5-year-old stuff. Come about when he went into kindergarten, we started seeing a lot more impulsivity. Kindergarten, first grade.
Can you describe what you mean when you say you see a lot more impulsivity?
Just the acting out in school. He was in a camp, pulling the fire alarm at the camp, wound up getting kicked out of camp. Kind of little, not that a fire alarm pull is a little thing, but not doing anything quite off the wall, but just that stuff that he knew was wrong, but that impulsivity would take over, and he would just go for it. So it was first grade. It was in second grade. He was eight years old. So 2018. We started bringing him to doctors, and that's when he was tested. He was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. And one thing with the anxiety and the ADHD, you notice a lot of, he wasn't able to control his body. Like, it was just constant movement. Even now, when he wakes up in the morning and before he takes his medicine, it's boom, bang, boom. It's all over the wall. You can see a difference with when his medication's on the low ends and when he's actually throughout the day when his medication is actually working. But it's a tremendous amount of just body movement. Just cannot sit still. Constantly wants to move. Besides the movement, he can become or he does now, but he was really like this back then, just hyper-focused on things.
Hyper-focused on things like, what do you mean?
Like, even if he read something in a history book, because even at that age, he was reading history. Like, he would he would sit down and have a conversation about World War II with you. And he would sound like he was an adult. So he was going into topics way above his level. But then he would learn every single thing about it. He would only want books on that topic. If he found a toy that he wanted, it was just that toy. And then he would move on. So it was almost like he become hyper-focused, move on to something else, but then become hyper-focused on that.
So can you explain why that sounds like a problem? Because it sounds to me like when he gets interested in something, he becomes hyper-focused in that thing that he's interested. And like you say, can talk like an adult about it. Why is that an issue?
Well, it's not really an issue, but nothing gets completed. So it's like, we're going, and then boom, we're off to the next topic. So it's kind of like a zigzag back and forth. So I mean I've read articles. I can't recall anything off the top of my head, but they're CEOs of companies. I mean, the ADHD is almost beneficial, not almost, but in some cases beneficial in some work environments, because you do have that hyper focus on certain things. But when it's uncontrolled, that's when you have that hyperactivity too, where you're floating from one topic to the next, to the next, to the next. So it's more after we got it under control that we were able to see that he was focusing in on things and able to complete tasks. So like, he just started back in his regular school system this year. He was in special programs from 8 until 11. And now he plays guitar. He swims. And those two things, he just accelerated right away. And they're two things that he found. The music, he's always kind of been with the music, but the team sports weren't good for him. Now we have him in doing swimming, and he's just accelerating. He's making friends at swim, because it's more of, yes, you're on a team, but you're competing more against yourself.
So what I think that you're talking about is something that I can honestly myself relate to, having been someone with ADHD still, is the hyper-focus aspect about it. To me, being able to hyper-focus on something and know a lot about it, like I am that way when it comes to the ketogenic diet. You can ask Tom. I chew his ear off about it all the time. But like you said, a lot of times what happens is you get these spontaneous, exhilarating bursts of motivation and energy and focus into something. You start something, you just never complete it. And then before you could even finish the first thing, you move on to a second thing, and you repeat that. And now you have 8 or 9 different projects that you started, or little passion projects that you started, and none of them are complete.
Right.
Is that something similar to what you're talking about? And and now that you've been treating your son, and your son's diagnosed and everything like that, how much of a difference have you seen in terms of what it was with starting all these passion projects and abandoning them to where he is now with soccer and swimming? I'm sorry, swimming and guitar. Yeah. Has his investment and attention into those things been consistent for a longer period of time than you've seen?
Yes. It's I mean, the guitar, he picked that up. He practices we don't have to fight with him to practice. He's in a band, he performs on stage, he sings, this is huge too, because besides the ADHD, he really suffers from anxiety, which we don't treat with any medications. And he has extreme anxiety. So for him to be able to grab onto that, focus on it, excel at it, get up on a stage and perform in front of people, whether it's he played the last concert, he was singing and playing.
That's amazing.
So doing tremendous. And even with the swimming, constantly pushing himself to beat himself. Taking it seriously when he's out there instead of just goofing off, even though he's 11-year-old and 11-year-olds goof off. He sees what he needs to do. But the anxiety on top of the ADHD causes not a problem, but kind of a.
It certainly makes things. They feed into each other. They're synergistic in terms of the effect that it has on the kid. When you have ADHD, you get anxiety, and then the anxiety feeds into the ADHD and back and forth and everything like that. So
like our doctors have said, like, you have to control the ADHD in order to control the anxiety, because it's the ADHD giving the anxiety. So it's a hard balance you got to find, and what we found with him is he does not react well to anxiety medications. So he was actually suicidal at 8 years old because he was on Zoloft. So we wound up having to hospitalize him twice. Once 2 days before Christmas, so that was a rough Christmas, which in itself caused other problems. So now here we are. We had to hospitalize him. He has PTSD now. Every Christmas, it kind of comes back to him, even years later, that he was in this hospital and stuff like that. But for some reason, the medication for anxiety with his chemistry just does not work. So we have to use therapy. It's 100% therapeutic is how he controls his anxiety, recognizing triggers, and just deploying different systems in order to bring himself back down, mostly like breathing systems and thought systems and stuff like that.
Can we talk a little bit about the stigmas that you were talking about? Okay. So when it comes to ADHD in general, what kind of stigmas do you think exist out there that is a hindrance to just people being more sympathetic and understanding to people with ADHD or dealing with it?
Well, I saw it years ago. I'll have to find it and send it over to you guys, but it was this poem written just about, it was coming from the first person of somebody with ADHD, and it was trying to get people to understand their mind just doesn't shut off. They're sitting there, and it's not that they can just turn their mind off or their body off and sit there still or not kind of have that impulsivity. It's their brain that's making them do it. And they have no control over that. And one of the problems we see is, as a society, we think everything could be controlled. Just like I said when we had our first child, it's parenting. That's that's what causes a kid to be good, you know. But it's not the case. It's a hard lesson we had to learn. But I think people, if they would just kind of look at it at the broader picture, I mean, when my son has come to me just almost in tears because he tries to go to bed and his brain won't turn off. It's just, and then he can't sleep. So then that lack of sleep causes more anxiety, and it's just this snowball effect over everything. All because maybe it was a song lyric, and he's singing a song in his head for 3 hours, and he can't go to sleep. And I know we've all had a situation. I mean, I think most people have experienced similar thing when they're trying to go to sleep, but it goes away for most people. He's sitting in class. Even if he's playing the guitar, sometimes if he's getting ready to dive in the pool, we watch him and you could be like, oh, he's going somewhere else right now, you know, like, and then you have to like call him back into that spot. But people do tend to look at it as it's because they looked at us. When we went to the hospital, we brought him to an emergency room because he had a mental health crisis at school. And I could tell the intake nurse was looking at us like we were just parents that didn't know what we were doing. Meanwhile, he was on medications that flipped a switch in him and turned him violent. And it wasn't the parenting, but she automatically, and this is a medical professional. I had it when later in the hospital with doctors and everything, when it took me, I came out of the room crying, asking somebody when they would do something, because that wasn't my son in that room, because of how the medications were affecting him. So even in that field, people still have that kind of stigma when they see things. So I think just educating people, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's ADHD, whether it's eating disorder, the more people know about it, the more they can understand that these people need help. It's not their fault. It's somehow how their brain, in which they're still trying to figure out how our brains work. You know, that's the greatest computer in the world, in the universe, and nobody knows how it really works. Even in 2023, which blows your mind thinking about all the other stuff that they come up with.
So one of the major stigmas that I've experienced also is that people automatically assume that the behavior of the child is directly related to a failure on the parent's part. And that is not entirely true. And oftentimes it's actually completely wrong. Right? So that's that you know, right now what you've given us was a lot of information on the perspective of seeing what it's like from the inside, seeing it from the parent's perspective, from your son's perspective. Earlier you talked about like you went to soccer practice and stuff like that, and then the coaches were always like having talks with you and all that stuff. What was the experience like, as best you can describe, for the person who doesn't know? You know what I mean? Like when they see a kid with ADHD or a person with ADHD, what do you think their experience is like? What are they seeing? Because obviously the perspective is entirely different. They don't know what's going through, what the kid is going through, what you're going through. To them, they're seeing just this person acting this way. What is the feedback that they have given you about your son?
I mean, it's... I'm trying to think. I mean, you kind of described, they see a child out there that's... Tom, you have children?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. All right. So if they're sports playing ages, if you've had them into any activities like that, it's almost as if your kid isn't ready to play D1 any sport at the age of 5. Like that's how these parents today go into these sporting things, and it's a shame because kids aren't learning. So when you have somebody with ADHD and other underlying issues, all they see is somebody who is bringing their child down. They're not contributing to the team because I mean, my son took his shoes off. He was playing goal. He just sat down and took his shoes off in the middle of the goal one day.
I've seen things like that being that I've been an assistant rec coach for years for soccer. I've seen kids like chasing butterflies, picking grass out of the ground. It's just, especially at the younger ages, it's just standard procedure. It's just, that's what they do.
It's
So that's a question that I have, right? So at what point does a kid's behavior with ADHD, or let's say you have a kid, at what point is he ADHD? When does he cross the threshold of standard kid who just acts like a kid into the area and realm of ADHD? What makes a kid ADHD versus just being a kid?
Right. I wish I was more prepared on the medical side of it. There is a test. Mm-hmm. There is a specific test. It's like a questionnaire test that multiple people take for an individual. So both myself and my wife took this test, and it's describing our son. And his teachers also took it. And based on the answers coming out of that, that's how they kind of dive into that actual diagnosis.
So they diagnose your son based on everybody around him?
Well, they do. I mean, it's not like he's sat in another room and no doctors talk to him. It's also based on their interaction with them. But a big part of it is this test. And we were blown away because 4 different people took this. We all put the same answers. So it was very visible.
Right.
When it came down to it, like when we were asked the right questions, it was clear as day. Our first time seeing a psychiatrist with our son, he was in the room 25 seconds, and the way he was crawling all over the chair, the doctor said he has extreme anxiety. So I'm not a trained doctor, but it became more and more obvious as we did kind of get more educated on the topic and talk to doctors and stuff like that.
Do you think that there's a stigma that comes with treating ADHD? For example, using medication?
I think medication it's used a lot more now. So I think before it was like, oh, they're on meds, this and that. And it was kind of a taboo subject. Now it seems like everybody's on some kind of medication. But we do talk to some people who they don't want to put their kids on medication. Where if they do, what we see a lot is they want the magic pill. They want that pill that you can give to that child, and all of a sudden everything is
normal.
Exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't exist. There is no magic pill. It's a combination of medicine and treatment. So medicine and therapy. Without those two things, it's the problem or the issue isn't going to be resolved or controlled. You really need to dedicate a lot of time to the situation. And it does take a lot. My son, when this first happened, was seeing a psychiatrist twice a month and the therapist 4 times a month when things were kind of at its peak. Which we went through medical insurance for probably about a year. And what we learned is when you're on medical insurance, there's a quality of doctor. So I'm not a doctor. I have to trust that doctor. What I learned is trust but verify. Don't trust your doctor. It's take what they say, and you have to do your own research. Because when my son had suicidal thoughts and went to that dark place, we were bringing up concerns about the medication, and they were just increasing it, which was making it worse and worse. And it wasn't until we started paying out of pocket that we found 2 doctors that he's been with for the last 3 years now and are amazing. But it's a shame because the cost associated with that is tremendous. And that medical insurance, like we were talking about the mental health crisis, especially when it comes to juveniles, it's really lacking. And unfortunately, to really get the services, from our experience at least, I'm sure there's other people who have maybe had better experiences. We did not get it until we went out of pocket and found private doctors.
So it sounds to me like once your son was diagnosed, getting him the appropriate treatment and medication was kind of a journey, right? Like you had to go to different doctors, you had to try different dosages, titrate. I think that's the word that smart people like to use, titrate different dosages of medication. Can you describe that process? How long was that process? What kind of trial and error process is that? Like, what are the consequences of trial and erroring medication wrong?
Okay. So it's a long process because think about it too. As you're growing, your chemicals are changing, your hormones are changing, all the chemicals in your bodies are changing. So those hormones, chemicals that your body produces are going to affect the way that a medicine affects you. So it usually starts at low doses and then increase until you hit that number that works. And pretty much it's based on interviews and then how we would tell the doctor what we are experiencing. So if it was helping, if we saw something different, that's where they would kind of zero in on things. And then you kind of fine tune it. So what I was saying a couple minutes ago with some of the doctors, they put them on Zoloft, which the black box warning could cause thoughts of suicide, which they kept on increasing, and he actually became suicidal and had an issue at school where I look at it as an attempt. And that's an 8-year-old. So to view your 8-year-old as being in that place, like any 8-year-old, let alone your own child. So the consequences, because I bring it back to the question you asked, you get it wrong, it can go severely wrong. It's so it is kind of you really have to monitor it. And that's when we were probably into it probably 6 months. Well, maybe less than that. We actually, the year this happened in 2018, we went to Disney. Happy kid, had a blast at Disney, like typical children. The school year started and it was like a switch flipped. So pretty quickly those meds were taking over, causing violence. He called the police on my wife. They were gonna emotionally disturb my son and bring him to the hospital. We kept him. I have 2 small daughters. They were scared to be in the house with them, and that's when we hospitalized them the first time. They didn't really do anything at the hospital. A couple months later, because they kept on, even though we were switching doctors, it was like the same course that they were taking. Again, it just wasn't right for my daughters to be in fear. And that was the second time we had to hospitalize him, 2 days before Christmas. And when we brought him to this hospital, that's when they were like, he's on Zoloft. And they immediately started cleaning him out of all medications. So they were going to start over from ground zero and work their way back up.
It sounds to me like he had ADHD, which, as a result of having ADHD, and I know from personal experience, causes anxiety, and that he was being treated for anxiety. What were these doctors doing for his ADHD?
Well, they were still giving him kind of the ADHD medications. So, kind of things to calm himself down. And that's just controlling that hyperactivity. So, like we said, once those medications are, like right now, he's been on only ADHD medication for, God, like 3 years now. And it's totally controllable. So it's like I said it earlier in the podcast, when the meds are kind of wearing off, you see a definite difference. It's just constant movement. You're like, you just gotta sit down, or we tell him, control your body, just slow, and then he'll slow himself down. He'll start thinking about it a little bit more. But once you get that mix of, and that's the same thing, that's a trial and error as well. But once you get that mix of medication, the ADHD is really controlled very well. Like I said, he's back in his school district after 3 years, and he's doing extremely well. He's high honor roll. He's interacting socially, and this is coming from a child who has been since 8 years old in a special program with 8 kids in the class. Now going to a middle school where he has a locker and moving from class to class, and all those different aspects of things coming in with social anxiety and just having to maintain the discipline inside of a classroom and inside of a general ed school where you're expected to sit there and learn. So he's adapted very well, because we've always said your anxiety, your ADHD isn't an excuse. So you do something wrong, there's still consequences. You can't use, well, I take medicine and I have this problem and that's why I did something that I shouldn't have done. And then they learn from that. But once the ADHD is treated, it really, like, sometimes we have to make minor adjustments in the medication, again, because they're growing and it becomes puberty's hitting it and it's throwing everything off. But once that's tweaked and that's under control, that helps bring the anxiety in. I mean, I've seen him go, like we said, we only treat him with therapy for the anxiety. I've gone from seeing him use his coping mechanisms multiple times a day to once in a while now, which I think is a big show of how controlling the ADHD side of it is aiding in that anxiety side of it.
So when you say coping mechanisms, you're talking about breathing techniques and things like that he learns at therapy. I see. Let me ask you, how have you seen his ADHD behavior affect his social life among his peers?
So a big part of it was team sports. He would be out on a basketball team and he's talking about everything but basketball. His mind's just not in it like the other kids. So then they tend to push him away. So team sports, it's really the sport, because he was in Boy Scouts for a while and he was doing actually very well in Boy Scouts. He was making friends and, but it's kind of that team mentality that becomes very tough, because If you have 5 people on the basketball court and 4 of them are goal oriented, and then you're over here thinking about the riff you want to play on a guitar,
right?
That's not going to mesh well.
It's funny too, because I think, like I've talked about it on the show several times, and I think Tom has experienced it with me on the show several times. Tom will be talking about something, and while he's talking about, let's say, a bottle of ink, because we love fountain pens and pens and ink, he'll talk about how there's too many air bubbles in the ink. That'll make me think about seltzer water in my head. And then all of a sudden my ADHD kicks in, and I'll just be like, oh, by the way, Tom, I had this awesome seltzer water brand. It's called Canada Dry, and there's a new flavor, and it's amazing. Meanwhile, he had been trying to communicate to me his experience with this new brand of ink, and what that looks like to someone outside of myself and Tom is that this guy listening to this didn't even hear what he had to say, didn't care, and completely dismissed it. When in actuality, I did take in what Tom was saying. It's just what Tom said happened to trigger a different path in my brain. It doesn't mean I wasn't listening. It doesn't mean I didn't care about what he said. But it's very easy for Tom to think that I didn't care or I wasn't listening because of my response. I didn't acknowledge what he said. I didn't appear to take in what he said, even though to me in my heart of hearts I did. Just it in my head, it triggered something else. And I think this happens a lot with people with ADHD, and I think that's one of the huge social issues that people with ADHD experience, that they are connected, but they just don't appear to be connected with the conversation that they're having with their buddies, or they hijack conversations oftentimes without the intention of hijacking a conversation, right? So, one of the things that you can see is you're talking to your kid about anything, and then he'll just suddenly change the subject.
Yep.
But that subject change is not that he didn't listen to what you were saying. It's just that it triggered something else that was in his brain, and he's responding with that. And I think one of the stigmas, and correct me if I'm wrong if you disagree, Erik, one of the biggest stigmas is that the person who is with ADHD just doesn't care about what they're listening to, or they're just not interested. So the other person can oftentimes feel very disconnected or insulted. And I think that ruins a lot of friendships. It ruins a lot of romantic relationships. I myself, coming through college, as a lot of damaged friendships, even as an adult in my professional career, a lot of damaged relationships that I probably can't mend or fix because I didn't know that it was happening myself. I would hijack conversations. I'd be off the wall, and to me, I didn't do anything wrong. Well, why are these people just avoiding me? Why do they dislike me? What did I do? I just don't know what's wrong, And I had no idea. And it's not until later that you find out. And that's not an easy path, because what you find is a lot of people dislike you. They avoid you. They try to just brush you off, and you feel it. You just can't really figure out why, and you're thinking, and then you end up spending a lot of time saying, oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's nothing. And then you dig more. You try harder, and then that never seems to work. You know what I mean?
I've stuck around, Roy. I'm used to. I feel like I am used to the non sequitur type conversations, and that to me, I could roll with it, and I like to actually try to make the connection myself to say, what could I have said to then spark that route of thought that then led to this other thing. Mm-hmm. So I just find it interesting because everybody's mind works differently. And I find it especially like fun and engaging when you have somebody who just could all of a sudden put something that seems unrelated into the context of what we're talking about.
Right. And, that's a huge reason why I'm so grateful that you're my friend. Because for every one of you, I'm telling you right now, in my life experience, for every one of you in my life,
10 people that can't take it.
there's 1,000 other people that won't tolerate it. You know what I mean? And you know, that causes a lot of like sadness in a person's life and stuff like that. And
it kind of affects your feelings of self-worth and validation, because then you're thinking to yourself, I'm the one who's damaged. I'm not I'm not normal like everybody else is. But
right. And that's for a full-grown adult.
Yeah.
Right. I can't even imagine.
Much more pressure for a child, for sure.
Especially since a child doesn't really know themselves. They don't really have an established sense of ID, and whatever little sense of personal identification they have, it's just being torn apart by soccer coaches that are saying that they don't want them on the team, or other kids saying that don't sit at our lunch table, or teachers openly disliking them in front of other students. And that happens a lot, especially with kids with ADHD. Teachers don't have the patience a lot of times. And I'm not saying all teachers are bad, but I sympathize with the teachers, because they have a classroom of 25 kids, right? And there's this one kid acting up and making it impossible for that teacher to tend to the other 24 kids. And teachers are human. It's going to cause frustration. It's going to cause resentment. And human beings can only act as human beings are, irrespective of a higher standard expected by the professional that's teaching, right? So I honestly do believe in the charity that Erik's talking about, because by educating people on a broader scale on what to expect, or what to identify as people with ADHD, will sincerely help people cope with those kids or be more sympathetic. For example, I was a martial arts instructor for many years of my life, and what I did find was the kid with ADHD, there was always a couple of kids in the class. The best way for me was to use positive reinforcement on every other kid, right? And not use negative reinforcement on the kid with ADHD. Like, for example, everybody's standing at attention, everybody get in your defensive stance, and everybody has their hands up, let's see jabs. I'd walk through the class, be like, Tommy, excellent job. I like how you're standing at attention without moving. Bobby, I like how Bobby's standing at attention without moving. He's going to help later with the dodgeball selection. And then here's Timmy spinning in circles. I just won't address him and praise him. Move on to the next kid. Or if I do, I'll just be like, oh man, I wish Timmy could also do this, because I would really like for him to be a dodgeball coach later. But we'll move on, and then I move on. And eventually I found that eventually worked. And I think the reason why I was able to do that, and I was always very patient with kids with ADHD, was because I sympathized with those kids. And it comes as simple as just understanding what they're experiencing. I didn't know what it's diagnosed as. I didn't know what that kid had or anything like that. I just knew that he was me. He's spinning in circles while everybody else is standing around. And I know what it feels like to be resented by the teacher. I know what it feels like to just be unliked. And I know how that felt, even though I was the one spinning in circles. And I'm not going to do that to a kid, you know?
I think what you're describing more is empathy versus sympathy, because you yourself have felt those things.
All right, Tom. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? I had no idea there was a difference.
Sympathy is like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's like, I could say, I'm sorry, I feel bad for you. Empathy is like, I know what that feels like, and that's terrible.
Okay.
I'm sitting here with you, and we're both on the same side.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So like if I got kicked in the nuts, you would empathize. But if
I know what I know what that feels like. Yes.
Right.
Physically speaking, but emotionally speaking, it could affect us in different ways.
Right. So I can certainly empathize with the kid. I can empathize with Erik's son. I can empathize with with somebody with ADHD. I guess what's hard for me, I don't have kids, and I think having ADHD and growing up with all the social issues and difficulties with relationships is part of the reason why I chose not to have kids. I don't want my kids to, I guess when I was younger, my mentality is I don't want them to be like me and be disliked and be the person that the teacher didn't like. And, you know, because at that time I didn't know that the reason I was like this was because I had a condition that was treatable and it was recognizable if people took the time to recognize it. I didn't know any of that. I just thought something was wrong with me and I shouldn't have kids. And I'm at a point in my life where maybe that decision not to have kids it might be a little bit late. It's late because of age, because of all these other things. But I'm thinking if it was recognized when I was a child and my teachers and my parents accepted what it is and empathized with me in regard to it, my life may have been different. I may have kids right now. I don't know. But I think things could have turned out differently. So that's why I think, you know, one of the biggest things that why I wanted to have Erik on the show was because Erik you're doing everything that you can. You're accepting the situation and you're doing everything that you can, from seeing professionals to learning about it, to expressing it, to now being part of a charity to help spread it. And like I said before, I feel like if I had empathy, or people around me had the knowledge of what I was going through and I was treated differently, I'm thinking there's a possibility things could have been different. I'll never know. But what I can say is what you're doing is definitely going to change the course of your son's life, definitely for the better. And if you can do it for your son and you can get this out to other people, it could change the lives of a lot of people's sons, a lot of people's daughters. And as a matter of fact, one of the most meaningful emails I ever got was, I was talking about my history with ADHD on a podcast some 50 episodes ago. And I was talking a lot about what I was experiencing. And this father was like, hey, wait a minute. He sounds a lot like the way my daughter is acting. So he got her checked out. Turns out she has ADHD. And he's looking into managing it and helping her. And I remember thinking, well, that's fantastic, because there's nothing worse in the world than feeling like you are an alien on a planet and you don't belong. And that creates anxiety, and the anxiety fuels the ADHD. The ADHD fuels the anxiety. Erik, what kind of advice would you give to parents right now with kids who are just acting out and stuff? Like, would you tell them, take them to a doctor? Would you tell them to, like, what would you say to them? They don't know that the kid has ADHD. Right. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. What kind of advice do you want to say to people right now? If every parent in the world is listening to you right now, what would you say?
Well, you have to observe. Like everybody, when you have your especially your first child, you think, I know how I'm going to do this. I've seen my parents do it. I'm not going to do certain things they did. I'm going to do certain things they did do. I saw how this person raised that kid, and you think you know everything, right? You have to observe. You have to recognize things. I mean, the guilt, me and my wife have talked about this, the guilt of the amount of times we punished him before we knew anything was going on. Just here we are constantly yelling at him because something he can't control. But there's that fine line, so it's tough. It's one of our doctors now actually travels around the country teaching pediatricians how to recognize ADHD and different mental health disorders at a young age, at that pediatrician age. So all I could say is observe, look for patterns. Patterns tell everything. If you see consistency in certain things, bring them to the pediatrician. Talk to your pediatrician. Just don't assume that you know, because we don't. If you're not a doctor, you don't. I don't pretend to know what my accountant does when he does my taxes. So we need to seek out the advice. But what I said in the beginning is trust but verify. So when it comes to your children, bring multiple doctors, get multiple opinions. But if you see those patterns developing, especially in the case of ADHD, you see the hyperactivity, that uncontrollableness in their bodies, where they're just constant movement all day long. I mean, my son, from the moment he woke up to the time he went to bed, his body did not stop moving. And we should have recognized that. But again, at 5 years old, you think that's a 5-year-old. But recognize and take the advice of doctors. So I said trust but verify, but when you find that doctor, if sometimes we have to work on ourselves as the parent in order to benefit the child. It's not when you bring your child to the doctor and they're working on a fix for whatever the situation is you're there for, there's going to be something that you can do as well. And take that advice from the doctor. If there's something you could change in your life that will benefit your child, because once you have children, that's what it's your entire life. You know, like I love my bikes, but my children come first.
Sure.
So just recognize it, and take the advice. Don't, if you automatically hear something you don't like because it's aimed at you, look at yourself, because everything you do is affecting your children, no matter what. I notice it if one's in the backseat of the car and I forget they're there and somebody cuts me off. We all know what happens. And then I'm like, oh, and they remember that. And that's going to be an influential moment. Maybe when they turn 16, well, that's how Dad was when he drove the car.
Right.
You know? But the other thing is, it's before all of this happened, I was very, what's the word? I'm just I grew up in an old, my parents are World War II era, like babies of World War II. So I grew up in that kind of mentality of a house, and it was just straight and narrow. This is how you did things. Open up your mind. After this has all happened, I've become much more accepting of everybody, no matter what their issue is, whether it's mental health or social, whatever it is. And that's going to help them out. Like show them that you're there to help them. And that they have your love. Because like you said, the social anxiety and what they're going through with we all navigated middle school and high school and college. High school's the worst, man. It's everybody thinks they have the worst problems in the world, and there are really no problems at all. Now that when I think about when I was back in high school, what I used to worry about. But at least when they're going through that, they know when they're home that you're there for them. So at least they have some kind of base, home base, and they can feel comfortable there. Because if they're not comfortable anywhere, it's just going to make the problems worse.
Sure. Now we got to start wrapping this up. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask?
Well, I think just to summarize, maybe I'm just hearing that being an advocate for your child is really a big thing when it comes to, and I think you're doing that exceptionally well, being that you're participating in this charity, and you're trying to get the awareness out there so that other parents could recognize this in perhaps their children, or recognize this in themselves, and also have more compassion for other kids that they don't, you don't know. It's not like we were saying before where you could see somebody in a wheelchair, you could see somebody with, a physical ailment or a defect or anything like that. It's something that somebody could look totally normal and act normal in a lot of circumstances, but then the things just go crazy, and it's just not. It's something that can't that it's not necessarily a behavioral issue that could be controlled, but it's just something that is part of the mental thing that's going on there. So to understand that could be what somebody's going through and have a little bit more compassion for it, and and be able to then try to help in ways that are beneficial, and not try to force somebody to feel like they're like you're saying, like an alien. That seems to be a good way of being able to go forward with this.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. It's 1 in 5 adults have some kind of mental health issue or ailment, but there's such a stigma around it. So that's such a huge percentage of people that have a problem, that they want to seek help, but the stigma's out there, and sometimes those people don't seek that help.
Sure. Like you were saying, there's a lack of assistance out there, especially for the younger kids, that you have to go jumping through hoops, as opposed to if you needed to go see the doctor because you caught the flu. Yeah, you could do that pretty easy. You could get a shot for it. You could get you could get medication for it, knock it right out. But when it comes to, hey, I need to talk to somebody to get some cognitive behavioral therapy, some strategies to help me manage my anxiety or manage my ADHD. It's like, my insurance doesn't cover that. And then it's like you're having to pay ridiculous amounts out of pocket. And this is not something that you could just do it once and then you're good. You have to do it and constantly practice at it. And that takes once a week or, twice, whatever. But then you're talking, I looked it up. It's like some hundreds of dollars per visit, and it's like for a lot of people, it's just not feasible. But it's very, very hard to find. So,
and I also find that there is always just polar opposites when it comes to the way people perceive mental health issues. Like, for example, if somebody has anxiety, they either treat you like you're about to go entirely insane, or they tell you just stop being a baby. And there's no in between that is suitable. So it's either you're brushed off and dismissed, or you're treated like you're totally batshit crazy. You know what I mean? And with kids, it's even, I feel like the perspective for kids is it's worse, because at least as an adult, you're still an adult, so you have more coping mechanisms, you have more life skills. But as a kid, you don't know anything. And all you have is just everybody telling you you're wrong. That's not right. Don't do that. Don't do this. And there's no solution being offered. They're just telling you, just sit still and focus. All you have to do is just focus. It's like, well, somebody needs to say to that teacher, if he could, he certainly would. And I think that's what this whole charity is about. Erik, can you, again, just plug the charity, plug what you need people to do, how I'm going to include the link in the show notes, but, what can they do? $1, $10, what is it? Talk to us about the charity.
Yeah, it's the Ride for Mental Health. Like I said, I think it's the 5th or 6th year now. 100% goes to the charity, the hospital, McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard affiliate. I sent you the link. It's that's my personal fundraising page. I'm just trying to raise as much money as I can. That's
so basically what happens is somebody's gonna be like, hey, let me click on this link, I'll send him $5, and for that $5 you're gonna just ride an obscene amount of miles on your bike. Is that how
I do a 2-day event. I do 50 miles each day.
Okay.
So it's a pretty one of the courses is a challenging course. It's quite a climb at the up in New Paltz. Mm-hmm. At mile 45, you have to do about 1,000-foot climb, which is not fun. And then the second day, I do another 50, which is on a nice rolling hill that's going south. And then there's going to be about 300 or 400 more people doing the same thing I'm doing. And everybody seems to be affected the same way. They have, whether it's themselves or whether it's a family member. And that's why we do this. Mm-hmm. It's, I had so many people my first year when I did this, total strangers donating $5, which blew my mind, because I'm not big for asking for money. I don't like it. That's what I like about this. I throw the link out there if you want to. You donate. I put it on my social media, but it's just me, just the way I am. But I will promote this as much as I can. Okay. I constantly promote it. And the money is a big part of it. And like I said, I wouldn't do a charity that 100% or at least 90% go to the charity. Because there are a lot out there that don't do that. Right. And it's not, you don't do charities to have parties. You do charities to help the cause. Right. And that's what I really like about this one.
Mm-hmm. And the cause is to raise awareness and educate people on ADHD and help families identify ADHD within their family and treat them, and also to remove the stigma of ADHD with children, adults, and people across the board. So you can click on the link in the show notes, please, and you can make your $1, $2, $5, $10, $100 donation, whatever it is that you're able to do. So that's one way you can be involved with the charity. And for me, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I've struggled with it my entire life. And I came out on the other side, and I feel like, and I've said to Tom on the show before, and I mean it wholeheartedly, I am happy with the person that I became and that I am. And I think my 5-year-old self would be very proud of who I am. But I feel like I was very lucky. I think there are people that are not as fortunate and that they could use some help. And this is a way that you can certainly help them. And I myself will be making a donation on behalf of the Pentertainment Podcast, because 100% I know that there were too many times in my life where I just got lucky and I didn't deserve that luck, but that luck helped me become who I am. And like I said, I'm happy with who I am, and I want other people to be happy with who they are. But getting to that point is very difficult. And you can help donating $1, $2, $10, whatever it is that you can, to the charity. 100% of the proceeds go to the cause. Now, that's one way you can get involved. Is there another way someone can get involved? You were talking about there being bicyclists. Now there's 300. There used to be 100. Mm-hmm. And the more people that are involved with the bicycling, collecting donations, I'm sure is also another way to help, right? Is there other ways? Am I?
Yep. So if you go to the rideformentalhealth.org, you can go on there. You can register to ride. There is a fee to register to ride. They do provide you with a nice jersey. It's part of getting rid of that stigma and promoting it. Nice cycling jersey. Which is all that stuff's donated. Like I said, it's not the overhead. Or you can volunteer. So along these 50-mile routes, the 100-mile route, there's rest stops with tremendous volunteers that are providing food, water, cold towels. And we also have SAG, which are support vehicles that are running up and down in case you catch a flat, stuff like that. So those are all volunteer positions, and they always are looking for volunteers. If you actually want to come up to New Paltz and kind of enjoy the weekend, it's a nice spot to go. It's only about maybe an hour and 10 minutes from the city. Mm-hmm. So not a bad drive, and you see some beautiful upstate New York. You're at the bottom of the Catskills. And it, like I said, it's a great cause to come out. So many different ways to help out. And like I said, a big part of this is getting that stigma away. So it's a big thing you'll see if you wind up seeing some of my stuff on Instagram is hashtag Ride Away the Stigma. Mm-hmm. It's we've been trying to build that for a few years. It's getting there, but everything we do related to this is that hashtag Ride Away the Stigma. So it's one of the main taglines of the charity is that, which, like I said, is just very, very important to me.
Well, listen, Erik, this has been a very informative and interesting discussion that, like I said, touches very deep in here and hits very close to home for me. Hits right on the roof of the home. That's how close it is to home for me. And everybody listening, I do appreciate you sticking it out with us for the entire episode. Please do what you can. Click on the charity link and make a donation, whatever you can do. Go to the link, and if you can't make a donation, maybe you can get involved in some other way. But please don't listen to this episode and do nothing. Let's do something. Let's try, I peddle pens all year round, and I push for you to use the affiliate link and the discount code. We can skip that for this week. We can just focus on the charity, right? And let's help people get out of the funk that they are in, and let's really just bring awareness to mental health issues that affect so many people that we just sometimes ignore. And I think that not only ignore but resent people for, but we can get rid of that. We can help educate people. This is one of the ways, and it's a major way. I love that 100% of the proceeds go to the cause, and it's not fluff. So, again, Erik, thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Erik.
And
thank you.
It was more than a pleasure, and I hope that this helps. I hope that this generates more donations and supports the cause more, because I believe in it wholeheartedly myself.
So, thank you.
Yeah, so we enjoyed having you, and I want to say to all of our listeners, thanks again for joining us for episode number 154 of the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast. I love you guys. Be well, be safe.
Stay inky.